So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to jump straight into the questions. I think it's always valuable to begin these discussions with a sense of what our actual work, that is the thing that we're defending and investigating, involves. Could you perhaps tell us a little bit about what you're working on in research and what you're teaching this term?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Let's do teaching first, because that's kind of easier. So at the moment, I've just finished teaching a course called The Politics of English. And that is a course that is, it's based around the word English. Some of it is literature and politics, but very contemporary, so novels from the last 10 years or so that deal with issues like Brexit or race or polarisation. English as a discipline, so we look at things like the national curriculum and the debates around education and ideas about education, history of education, and frame within debates about national identity. So English is a name of national identity. So that's a kind of third year course that weirdly I've taught on and off for nearly 30 years in different institutions even. And the students get very engaged because it's about kind of their life. So the fiction reading is novels that speak to what's going on at the time about trans rights or something. And the education, one of the sessions is them thinking about their own experience of being educated in English. So it really goes right into what they do. And it kind of takes the curtain off from behind the discipline, so you can see all the kind of things going on in its structures. So that's the main course that I've been teaching, because I've also have a role as Associate Dean for Research, so I'm doing a lot of kind of managing colleagues and their research and all the things that senior academics end up doing. But I really enjoyed teaching that. And then I had some fantastic dissertations this year. I had one on comics, I had one on contemporary women's writing, a whole array of things. And then I also teach, so this year, I also teach a first year course, the first year's just arrived, called Thinking as a Critic, which is about, it's not a kind of skills course, but it's about framing what English students do when they arrive, what the subject is, what the aims are, what the debates are in it. And that's always, I really enjoy that, because things I think we take for granted, like the death of the author, it's always just great introducing that to 18-year-olds. And then I have my philosophy and literature course, which is a kind of third year course where we do Plato and Aristotle, but in quite a contemporary way. And that's
research.
Oh, my research. Okay, so that's a much more complicated question. So I think when I first met you, I was probably started writing my book on Hannah Arendt, and I still haven't finished it. So I'm writing a book about Hannah Arendt and literature. I've got a pedagogy book called What We Teach When We Teach Literature, which I'm kind of writing. And then I'm also putting together a rather like Politics of English course, a book about contemporary English politics and its fiction. So the influence of one on the other and the other back on the first. And that came out of my work on Brexit. So those are my three big projects, but I also have, like everybody got side projects. I've just done another Holocaust essay and so on.
What was it that drew you to studying postmodern and contemporary literature, of the entire span of English literature? Why the sort of this moment and the one before it?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I suppose I think part of our job is to think about where we are and who we are and when we are. I know you can do that with the 18th century or with Milton or with anything, but I think that contemporary fiction speaks really clearly to who and when and how we are. And I suppose I think that what grabbed me about postmodernism and deconstruction, which is kind of where I came in, is that they speak not just to the aesthetic forms, but also to the intellectual ideas and their genealogy. So you can't understand deconstruction or postmodernism or post-postmodernism or wherever we are now without having a sense of where they came from, or where that came from, or where that came from, kind of going back. So I think that one of the things about intellectual life in whatever subject is you're a kind of little boat floating on a huge ocean, and these great big waves of thought that kind of that you little boat bobs up and down on, and what you do is to try and swim down through the waves of thought, which takes you back deep under the sea and deep back through time. And I suppose that's what really attracted me to deconstruction and postmodernism and their complicated interrelation.
So perhaps you can enlighten, less so for Tim, Tim's probably fully aware, but for Rosalind and I, you can enlighten us who live our lives in centuries past. What are the trends or issues in contemporary literature and thought that we should be paying attention to?
I wish you should give me a warning at that question. Okay, so that's a really good question. So what are the trends in contemporary literature? So one I think that I talk about a lot with people is that genre is all askew at the moment. So I guess it used to be the case, perhaps it never was, but it used to be the case that there was serious writing and then there was genre writing, and now that's all mixed up in really interesting ways. So people are writing serious. Genre fiction's always been serious, and partially because genre fiction can, traditionally written quite quickly, can get into kind of contemporary issues much more quickly, and that's true of police, criminal crime fiction and science fiction and romance. But all those kind of genre elements are now in what's called serious fiction. I do think serious fiction is a different kind of thing for reasons we'll talk about later, but that's one kind of mess that's there. I think another thing that's going on that's really interesting is a whole array of different relationships to the past. Mm-hmm. So it used to be, there were historical novels, and academics would say, well, that's not 60 years ago, so that's not a historical novel. But now there are lots of different ways of relating to the past, and that partially reflects a kind of old postmodern idea that our relationship to the past itself is questioned by modernity in the present. So different relationships to the past, and then there are kind of more passing trends. So I think we've had 10 years of kind of trauma fiction, 10, 15 years of trauma fiction. I think that seems to be kind of passing off a bit now. I think we've had we're Rangers office, aren't we? So I mean there is a kind of ongoing cosmopolitan kind of fiction that I think is really interesting. In the UK, one of the things there are two things that I think are interesting. One is that there is a significant amount more translation being read, and not just by academics who've always read lots, but like in the mainstream. So I think that's a really interesting and quite welcome change. And I also think that again in the mainstream there's more experimental fiction being read. So you would find, whereas in the olden days it would just be academics reading experimental fiction, you'll find that there are some experimental writers who have much wider kind of name recognition. So I think those things are interesting kind of changes, and they might have positives and negatives. So some of the sociology stuff seems to say that fewer men are reading and more women are reading, and that changes the reading profile. But those would be my kind of shooting from the hip answers to that. Fantastic question.
Yeah, go for it.
Because then I would just do you see any difference there between like British and American or other Anglophone contexts?
So that's another really great question. I can't speak to I can speak to some of the American trends. Yeah. I can speak to the not the experimentalism, I don't think, or the translation. I don't know about that. But I think the relationship to the past stuff is also true in American fiction. And again, it's also increasingly cosmopolitan. I mean, it's all America's America. But so I think there's an interesting thing going on there. Maybe there's still a bit more trauma literary than the UK. But yeah, so I can't answer that as a well enough.
No, that's entirely right. This is very off the cuff and shooting from the hip. Okay.
So I guess I'm curious about two different sides of things, partly because I wasn't a student all that long ago, though it's feeling increasingly distant. And the first thing is about the UK rejoining Erasmus
Mhm.
and how that might change the picture of what we think about as a discipline in the way it's shared, and whether more students are going back and forth, and whether we can think about that as a more international experience than it once was.
Well, can I turn that question back on you
Of
quickly?
course.
So here, do you have lots of English Erasmus students?
We've had a couple, and I think we're always welcoming them.
Yeah.
But it's obviously been harder for UK students to get funding that's meaningful enough for them to come, and
Yeah.
there's also the tension between being in Germany and the system being free, basically, and a UK student having to justify coming into a free system while still paying fees at home. So I think Erasmus helps to build that appeal, right? So,
Yeah.
um,
So I suppose I want to say two things that sound contradictory. So I'll say the negative one first, which is I think that my experience, my institution's experience of Erasmus has been that it's always been quite small. So you get some fantastic students coming over, but not very many, and not very many of our students go out. And I think the statistics show that in general in, I can't speak for Scotland, but for the UK, the English system, not as many students go out as could do, which is really sad. But I think underneath that, my positive thing is I think that the intellectual relationships between the UK and Europe. So when Erasmus was reopened to British students, everyone was really, really pleased and happy, because it's a sign of trying to strengthen those relationships. And it's been my experience, partially because I'm more senior now, so you see things kind of going on at a higher level, but also I think more generally that those links between British universities and European universities are getting stronger. There's more exchanges. It's not surprised to find a Hungarian academic in one of your colleagues' offices, and he's there for a term. So these things I think are really strong. Organisations like ESSI, I think, are going from strength to strength and increasingly recognised. So I think while perhaps the student exchange thing isn't as strong as it could be, I think that the growing links between universities have become more and more important. And of course, the internet and everything makes that easier too. And I think that so universities have always been on the kind of front line of globalisation, like since print was invented. You know what I mean? So, and I think that Brexit particularly has made people really recognise that and try and respond by making more international links. So we'll see how that goes. Does that answer your question?
yes, I think it does. I think it's all speculative. I'm not someone who did a student exchange when I was doing my bachelor's program, but it was certainly open to me, and it's one of the things I regret. So now I am always telling students, if you can, then take the opportunity, and I hope that UK students hear the message. Do come over and see us in Germany and elsewhere.
So I have the same story. I remember two of my friends, Claire and Nina, went to Amsterdam when I was at Manchester, my first degree, and they came back after 10 weeks, and they were like different people. They learned so much. It was such an amazing experience. So then I was kicking myself. I wish I had gone.
Yeah. And shall I do my second question? My second question is more on our side, and I think you've touched on it already a little bit, but we're always talking about the crisis of the academy and things falling apart within the university, and perhaps that might be true. But it also means that there are a lot of colleagues that hold PhDs that now work outside of institutions. And I think reframing some of our conversations instead of around a crisis of the academy, but rather as the building of a scholarly community might be a new way of looking at it. And so I was wondering what your thoughts are about where we should build that scholarly community, and which institutions and other organisations we should be looking to strengthen that kind of image of the future.
So that's a really great question, and I have got a kind of much longer answer, of which that will be one small part, but perhaps I might say that for later on. But in relationship to the to the people with PhDs who hope for careers who haven't got careers in academia. So I think individual institutions are doing what they can to give honorary research associates and so on, but that doesn't help all that much if you. But I know that, for example, the English Association that I'm very involved with. So the English Association is the UK's subject association for English. Take this really seriously. So we have on our higher education committee, there is somebody, as exactly as you say, with a PhD but without an academic job, who kind of sits in that committee and helps advocate for those people. We work really hard to have events that are open to those people, and we've even tried to run kind of associate schemes to keep people in touch wherever possible. And that goes hand in hand with universities giving honorary research associates, which allows you access to the library, which allows you access to journals, which allows you to carry on publishing if you have time and you're also working in your job in the civil service or whatever it might be. So I think try and take that really seriously and create kind of spaces for people caught in that position, as well as all that advocacy for used to be called ALT-AC, alternative academic careers. So helping people understand that all the skills they've got on their PhD are fantastic skills for the world of work. And quite often I meet people who turn out to have PhDs in edited literature who are now civil servants or who are now involved in NGOs or what have you. And I always ask them, like, do you think your PhD skills have helped you? And they always say yes, interestingly. I mean, to me, I'm a professor of English, so of course they probably do. But I mean, I think it's true.
Then I've got a slightly provocative question, which is that there's a lot of traction to be gained, particularly on the platform formerly known as Twitter, in selling the doomerist version of academia. Newspaper columns can be sold by saying that no one reads and saying that the academy is dead, the humanities in particular. You do a lot of work across different levels, including higher levels of government. Is there a message of hope that you've got for us? Can you give us some good news?
Can I give you some good news?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what granular good news do you want?
We'll take anything we can get.
So, okay, so let me think of some detailed good news, which is that the exams that students do at 18 in the UK, A-levels, in England and Wales, the numbers choosing to do English had fallen steeply, but have now stabilised. Mm-hmm. So it's lower, but it's stopped falling. So that's really great. But I suppose the other thing I want to say about the kind of good news is that you sometimes get the feeling that one of the issues with English or literary studies or the humanities is that the policymakers and so on, and particularly people involved in thinking about careers, kind of don't take it seriously. And I think that story is starting to change. You see it in newspaper columns and so on. It's partially because things like the English Association and various humanities organisations have been trying really hard to hit this message. So one example is over kind of career skills. So it's a joke about, what are you going to do with an English degree, what do you do with a philosophy degree. In fact, it turns out that the skills you get from an English degree are absolutely vital skills for the world of work. Communication, creativity, it's kind of like problem solving, collaboration, and critical thinking. I mean, these are vital skills for the world of work, and that kind of message is starting to get across to people that if you want someone to pay attention to their team and manage them well and work out what to do with them, it's exactly those skills you get from being in a seminar discussing 18th century literature that are the skills that you need. If you need someone to explain what's going on, to process complicated data and then to talk about it really clearly, again, those are the kind of communication skills that we teach our students. If you want someone to think outside the box, it's exactly the kind of creativity that you do in creative writing or in English generally. In fact, with AI, for example, lots of the things we used to be told, my kids were told, learn to code, you won't get a job. But now, of course, coders don't do any coding. Okay, so in fact, those skills are crucially important. And my evidence for that is, and you can Google it. Google did a huge project called Project Oxygen on what made you successful at Google. And they thought, it's going to be great at being coding or a great software engineer. But in fact, the skills that made people successful at Google, 100,000 people, are exactly the skills that I've been talking about. They could communicate, they had empathy, they could pay attention to people's narratives. All these are the skills that business is absolutely crying out for. And that sort of story is just starting to land, I think. And it's taken years and years and years of me and my colleagues writing to newspapers, doing columns and so on. But it's just starting to turn things around a bit. And so I think that's a positive bit of change you can just about see. But I suppose the other thing, my other bit of positive news, is to say that, all the doom and gloom, and I don't do Twitter anymore because it's gone fascist, so I do Blue Sky, but all the doom and gloom is all there, but at the same time, when you look at what people are actually doing, it's just fantastic. So I'm lucky enough to be on the REF panel. In the UK, there's a thing called the Research Assessment Framework, because universities are funded by public money, so it's a way of measuring accountability. And what you do in the REF is that two things I'm talking particularly, you read research books and articles by your colleagues across the UK, and you also read impact case studies. So I have the privilege of reading hundreds of articles and books published before 2021, and I will have that privilege again in 2029. And you just see all the amazing stuff that your colleagues are doing. It's just fantastic, amazing research, so interesting, so fascinating. So that's one thing, so it's really alive intellectually. And then also there are these impact case studies, where the idea is that, how does our discipline shape or help things in the public sphere? And you read these things, and some of them are really small, so it's projects around people with Alzheimer's being shown films and read poems. And you think, okay, that's amazing. And sometimes they're huge projects about public memory or making museums more accessible. And you think, these are amazing things that our colleagues, who think they're just experts in Shakespeare, turn out to be having this huge public impact. And that's also an amazing bit of good news. So I think that the doom and gloom is kind of froth on the top, but actually what we do is really thriving.
I agree. Would you like to take us?
I do like to sort of specifically onto that, because it's one of the things that I've been writing about, because I am anxious about this all the time. So I've been writing about the question, like, what is the good that I'm doing in the world, right? And, right. And sort of one of the things you just did there was, like, you have this little triad of English literary studies and the humanities. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is, like, sort of what's specific here about, like, English? Sort of what is the specific that's not sort of any humanities degree? Which many people would say, like, critical thinking, right? Anybody could write that on their little, what do we do for you? But why English?
Okay, so I that's a really great question, and I've got a caveat before I answer it. So my caveat is that it kind of depends who you're talking to. Okay, so when I'm talking to students or to policy people, I talk about those communication, critical skills, those 4 C's. So these are what, and I don't want to exclude my colleagues who do modern languages or history or philosophy. So I think there is a lot of commonality, and of course, don't we have intellectual debates about, isn't philosophy just rhetoric, or isn't literary theory just philosophy, or do you know what I mean? So deep down, they are quite congruent. What is specific about English, I think, are various things. I don't want to talk about too much in terms of skills, but in terms of kind of worldview. So one, I think, is my second caveat is there are people working on this in the UK. There's a whole skills project about what is specific about English. But so I think that one of the things about English is to begin with, it's an enormously inclusive discipline. Okay, so the debates about what's in and what's out are kind of gone. So we know we're an enormously open discipline. And I think that means that the people who come out with English degrees have a kind of openness to different stories and so on, to different worldviews, that I think is broader than other disciplines. So that's one thing. I think there's stuff about, we're also a very feminized discipline. So there's stuff about gender you don't get in philosophy or in history that I think is really interesting. You see it when you work with secondary school teachers. So that's another kind of social thing. I suppose also I think that the one thing I like about literature and thinking about literature is that it's unbelievably messy.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you look at other disciplines like history or philosophy, part of their disciplinary job is to cut away the mess. So we're going to get right to the pure logical argument, or we're going to find what's the archive, what's the historical steps. Whereas our discipline is about the mess. So we know that when you have a seminar or a novel, they talk about this and that, and there's the historical context, there's the author's life, if you like, there is the own reader's reception, there's a whole array of different political views. And I think that mess opens up ways of thinking about the world in our graduates, which allows them to think with mess, to bring all the different things together. And I think that's quite a specifically Englishy kind of thing. You also expect me to say stuff about metaphors and stuff about stories and understanding character arcs. And I think that's true too. And I think you can see that in your Twitter or Blue Sky discourse. You can see people talking about character arcs or character development in a way that you think, oh, these terms come from our discipline.
Yeah.
And I think even more complicated ideas. So one of the things that structures English is an idea of personal growth. And it's been that way not because of the 60s, but since the 60s. And I think that idea is an idea that our graduate students take, and that leads to all sorts of interesting things in all sorts of different professions. So it's diffuse, okay? So it's not like learning to code or what have you. But I think there are kind of specific English things. But digging them up and displaying them is harder to do. And of course, it's always the case that you find people who say, oh yeah, reading lots of novels didn't help me with my job as a TV executive. And you think like, but isn't one of your jobs to actually process lots of scripts and ideas and so on? Isn't that a bit like reading novels? Wouldn't that? So sometimes you have to dig it out of people, their particular English skills. I'll give you one example.
Sure.
Okay, so just by chance, I met the sister of a friend of mine who is now quite a senior social worker, and she'd done a degree and a master's degree at Newcastle in English. You went? No,
I went to.
Sorry, I'm confused. Yeah, and her MA had been on children's literature, and so one thing that led her into social work was kind of sympathy for children, but the other thing was that she realised that one thing she had to do in a more senior role was to constantly tell their stories and advocate for them. And she said that one of the things her English degree taught her was kind of was deep grounded techniques of doing that, writing in their voice, not writing in their voice, but writing from their point of view, advocating for them in a way that she'd learnt from reading children's literature, which was part of her kind of report writing. And that was one of her examples of a really clear movement of one kind of skill. It wasn't just, I'm good at communication.
Yeah.
It was I'm good at effective, persuasive communication on behalf of these children, precisely because I'm an expert in children's literature. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's very interesting, actually, because occasionally I will teach sort of adult further education classes sort of in the area. And one of the things that will come up, because you said, right, sort of, am I expecting you to say something about metaphor and character development?
Yeah.
That's what these older students, right, will want from me, right? And I will always push back and say, this is boring. You don't need the words for that, so you can put the right tag onto that, right? We're about like finding out what kinds of things this text might be doing to you and with you, right? Sort of in a very open frame.
Yeah.
But it is sort of hard to get like the school idea of literary studies out of people's heads, where it's like, there's names, teach me the names, right? Let me know what a sonnet is, right? What is the name of the rhyme scheme and that kind of stuff. Like, you don't need to know the name of the rhyme scheme. You realize it rhymes, it's fine. Like,
I agree with you completely. So it's the non-factual knowledge of literature that needs to be got across. Absolutely. And so I'll give you another example, which is slightly pointed against one of my friends, a historian. So we were looking at a painting a painting of a woman who's clearly been fallen. As a Victorian painting, and he was like, "This painting isn't telling us anything," and I was able to say, "Oh no, it's telling us exactly this." And I was able, precisely my bit of interpreting text, was able to broaden out the painting to him, and that skill of kind of seeing what's going on, drawing out the mess, and drawing out the wider context is a crucial Englishy skill. Of course, other disciplines do it too, but the speed of it and the openness of it, and saying like, "This is what's really going on," I think is an Englishy thing, and you see that with English students 5 years after they're graduating.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things you might be, so I'm drawing from this explanation, is like it's not like a hard border around it, but it is this diffuse border where other disciplines will have other diffuse borders, and how a particular sort of diffuse border does particular things that others will not do.
I'll give you another example actually. So this is from a novelist, so that's quite Englishy. So he's written a non-fiction account based on his great-grandfather's kind of memoir, and his historian would say straight away, your great-grandfather's memoir is clearly mendacious. I mean, it's clearly covering up the truth. And it just didn't strike him, with his English background, that was the case till 3 years into writing his non-fiction account of it. But what he did have was the sense of the structure and interest about why was it boring here, why was it interesting there, what was going on there, what was the kind of subtext. But he didn't have the historian sense of like, is it true or false? But he had a kind of rhetorical sense of how is it working, how is it not working. And that seemed to be a really interesting distinction between those two disciplines.
So the reason you're here, kind of quote unquote, right? The reason I'm here, at least, right? You got invited by me, but like I'm here because we're interested in the question of form. Right. And one of the things I was wondering about is like sort of in your work, you write a lot of books. Many of them quite good. The ones that I've
all
read.
my children are lovely.
Well, I didn't want to speak to the ones that I hadn't read.
So many of them are. So obviously one's work varies. Of course.
So, but the word I put down here is like, why do you write books, and sort of specifically books as a form of scholarly communication?
That is a really great question. So I've got a fake answer and a real answer.
Cool.
Okay. So the fake answer, of course, which is also true, which is that in our discipline, the kind of monograph book length study is the shape of the thought. You know, articles and so on are great, but the monograph is where you say your thing and you roll it out and you do your 4 chapters and you cover your thing. And I don't see that changing. It hasn't changed my 27 years I've been at Royal Holloway, and I don't think it's going to change because that's the shape of the thought. And we all know that they're hard to write and they're quite easy to read, and so that's one reason. Okay, because that's the rhythm. That's the form of the discipline's intellectual behaviour. The secret reason why I read books is because there's much less interference in a book than there is in an article. And it's true that whenever you're edited, the work is better. Okay, and that's absolutely right. And you know very well when you get an article back that says, please do this, please do that. And you think, no, and then you do what they say because you've made it better. But in making it better, you've also made it better for the different people who've got stakes in it. So for you, but also the journal, the editor, and so on. Whereas with a book, once you've got the contract and perhaps it's read again, you're much freer to write not only the intellectual structure you want, but also the kind of style you want. So I had a chapter came back from a big companion, big research-led companion, and it said your style is much too chatty. And I like writing in a chatty style. I think it's quick and efficient, as well as being easier to read.
Yeah.
But you have to make it more academic. That's what we want. It's fine, make it right through, make it boring. But in a book, you can write in a way which is much more responsive to how you want to write. You can write in a more chatty way. You're also in a position. So my second book, because it was very interdisciplinary, had 7 different readers after it was finished.
Oh my God.
No, I was a bit freaked out. And 6 of them, 5 of them loved it. One of them was kind of so-and-so, one of them gave it a kicking. And so, but once you've got a book, you're able to say, unlike an article we had about changes, you can say, well, I don't want to do what they said about chapter 5, because in chapter 4 I say this, and chapter 6 I say this, and that's the kind of shape of it. So weirdly, a book, which is such hard work, not only is the rhythm of our discipline, but it also gives us a way to reflect ourselves a bit more.
Yeah. So do you think it's the rhythm of our discipline for contingent reasons, or because it's actually like it is the form, it is the best way of doing things? Those are not
that's a really hard question. I suppose I'm not convinced there could be. I know what you mean about the best way of doing things. Like the best way of doing philosophy is chatting with people in the agora. Okay, so I don't think there could be there could be an intrinsic best way of doing it. So maybe historically contingent reasons might be my answer. But I also think that our discipline is incredible. I mean, I know it seems dumb, but it's an incredibly creative discipline. And I suppose that the novel has been the dominant form of prose writing for 200 years, 300 years. And what our books are not novels, but they kind of are an imitation of that. So maybe there's something in that about it allows your creativity room to spread. I mean, I've read lots of astonishingly good monographs. I've read some bad ones too. But I mean,
I've written some bad ones.
Yeah, so I suppose that's my kind of answer. That's a really good. I like writing books because you have.
Yeah, that's not fun. I mean, so I know that you've written sort of in very different formats for the monograph as well. Like, do you have a sense of what each of these does for you? Sort of the short, like to the point, 100 pages, or the very short introduction versus sort of the extended.
Different audiences. So I'm very clear in my mind. Well, I'm trying to be chatty for whoever I write to, but clear in my mind about who the audiences are and how much you can push them and how much you can show them of like the kind of roots of your thought. And so when you're writing for 18-year-olds, you don't need to tell them that this bit comes from Foucault, this bit comes from Arendt, this bit comes from Heidegger, this is me explaining Derrida to you. You can a little bit towards the end to say, some of these ideas come from, but they don't need to know that kind of detail. And then conversely with your big books, you can do that because scholars are going to be reading them, and you have to explain, look, I'm taking on this bit and doing it in this way, and so on. And also, of course, for scholars, you can use people's names and ideas as shorthand.
Yeah.
So you can take people 5 steps into the argument about Derrida, or whatever, in one paragraph, rather than having to explain the whole thing. So that's the key difference, I suppose. If you're writing for an audience who aren't academics, you can't bullshit, and you've got to do all the explaining.
Yeah.
Whereas if you write for academics, you can get there quicker. You simply tell me where your position is, and that's why we read the footnotes first, isn't it? We look at people's footnotes to see who's influenced you, who's shaped you, who you're arguing with, and then we read the rest of the stuff.
Yeah,
That's just me.
No, it just makes sense.
Do you do that?
I don't know
I ever read footnotes.
Oh, yeah, but you surely, because that gives you a sense of, it's like, study a historian before you study the history. You get a sense of where they're coming from, what their influences are, what their, and then that helps you understand the form of their argument. Because it's all conversation. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I love about our discipline is that all the books are in conversation with each other. And that's what we teach our graduates to do. We follow back the conversation, who these books are arguing with, and that's what all intellectual life is like. So science is like that too. It's following back through time what the conversation is, put yourself into that conversation. So that's what the footnotes are really, is the marking with the history of that conversation.
And for anyone watching who reviews anything I do read the footnotes diligently.
This will be a straightforward complaint for your reviews from now on.
He's not enough footnote. That is always the complaint.
I mean, I do want, because I have it in my notes, because you are one of the English experts on the REF.
Yeah.
So our group, right, when we talked about the kinds of sort of things that we need to talk about when we talk about academic forms and how they work, one of the things that does come up quite frequently from British academics is there is now this very sort of strict framework of what even counts as a form, if you like, right, as a recognized form of how you can create an output and what doesn't, right, which is the REF for many of them. I'll say, I'd like to do this, but I can't find the box that I can drop it in when somebody says, here's my output.
So number one, from the point of view of the research, the REF panel, that's literally not true. Okay. So so let me tell you what's not true. Let me tell you what's underneath that.
Yeah.
Two things underneath that. So the aim of the REF panel for English, but for all the different subjects, there are 31 panels, is to find excellence, find research excellence. Okay. So when you write a great book for undergraduates, okay, that's not research. Okay. Or when you write and we're open to research in all its different forms. So a narrow version of that is that if you've got an article published in Shakespeare, okay, all the Shakespeareans in the world are going to read it. So that sounds really huge. But you might also have an article in the Icelandic Journal of Philology, of Nordic Philology, okay? And both of those, from the point of view of the REF, are exactly the same. Okay, because they're both about the research. The scale doesn't matter. And similarly, the form doesn't matter. Okay, so we read all sorts of different forms. One of my colleagues, actually a creative writer, one of their submissions was etchings on glass. Okay, so it's a kind of creative submission. So the kind of form doesn't matter. So you mentioned last night about people saying, it's got to be 6,000 words or whatever. It doesn't matter. So, in one sense, that thing they're saying about the forms is completely wrong. And in fact, one of the things about the REF, reading lots of creative writing, is a real openness to different kinds of forms, because new forms are new forms of research, aren't they? It's like new poetic forms is a new way of writing poetry. That really is research in that kind of creative writing field. But the flip side of that is to say that it is the research we're looking for. So, if you've written a fantastic popular reader book, okay, so or that is about Shakespeare, okay, but hasn't got new research in, it may have been well reviewed, okay, it may be the summit of your life's work, speaking to a general audience, but a Shakespeare expert reading it thinks, but there's no new research here. Okay, so I see it's a Penguin book, it's a great career thing to have done, but there's not much research in it. So and it's the research that the research exercise is looking for. So that might be why some people think that the form is important. Okay, another example again about the REF is that there are all these handbooks and so on for students that I've certainly written my share of those, and again, they may be great for students, you may have worked to make it really clear, but they're not researchy very often because they're summarising the state of the field. And so your colleagues often say, well, it's great to do a student handbook essay, fantastic, but it's not good for the REF. So again, that's where that comes from. And the third thing, of course, is that academics are always keen to blame something outside which is bad and controlling for their own kind of worries. I'm a huge fan of the REF. I think it's been fantastic. The evidence is it's really good for women and minorities. It's really good for dissolving the old school tie, because it's not like who you know, it's literally what the work is. And it's important to be accountable, and I think it does do that.
And I think for time reasons, we're going to have to move this to the cafe. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.